I need Chicago to step it up here. Like I need them to stop cowering before the New Yorkers and going, "Oh no, actually we eat tavern style up here." No, deep dish pizza is the correct pizza. Stop being a bunch of assholes and defend your proper pizza. Stop. Pizza should not be cut into squares. That's bullshit.
Also, tavern style, it's communion wafer pizza, right? It's cracker with sauce on top. I'm sorry, I have to say it. It's not good. Chicago deep dish is superior to tavern style, and whatever of you freaks in Chicago want to come for me, you can. The deep dish is better.
The only way they can get away with it not being communion wafer pizza is because those clowns in St. Louis make something that's even more ludicrous than Chicago Tavern.
See, now we have a little bit of a division on the pod here because I enjoy Chicago Tavern pizza. It's not my favorite Midwest pizza. That would be Detroit. But I think it's a legitimate expression of the pizza maker's art, and I prefer it to the deep dish casserole.
That is the most political pizza answer I've ever heard in my entire life.
We need to subject him to a round of booing for how careful that was.
Yeah, I'm moving to Detroit. I'm going to take on Buttigieg in a couple of years.
No, you're going to have to go up against that redhead woman, the hot redhead girl that everybody is in for.
McMorrow, yeah. You know, one thing that the Pope being from Chicago opens up for us is that we might actually get an infallible ruling on the superior Chicago pizza. It's not likely, but it's in play.
All of the different Chicago things that the Pope has done are very funny to think about. I spent a whole weekend thinking about this last weekend. Like, it is not entirely impossible that the Pope has heard the band The Smoking Popes. Great indie band from late 80s, early 90s Chicago.
Also not totally impossible that he's managed to make his way through life without a Malort martini, which is something I wouldn't recommend anyone drinks, but does exist.
Where in God's name did you have a Malort martini?
I don't want to talk about it, and I'm not legally allowed to.
Since we're talking about the Pope and bands, I would like to see Billy Corgan go to the Vatican and try to introduce himself to the Pope, since they're both Chicago guys. And I want to see it play out just like the Rod Dreher thing, where he put out that terrible book, The Benedict Option, and went to the Vatican and met Pope Francis and said, Mr. Pope, I wrote The Benedict Option. And Francis looked at his name badge and looked up at him and just sort of stared blankly, like, I have no earthly idea what you are talking about. I want to see that for Billy Corgan.
I don't want to see that for Billy Corgan because we're going to get a triple album out of it.
Welcome back to Normal Men, a podcast about being normal in a very abnormal time. Each week, we'll talk about the news, make some jokes, and just be normal about all of it. Thanks for listening and enjoy. Some good news for once out of the Tar Heel State, which is something I don't get to say very often. So Jefferson Griffin had lost the Supreme Court election last fall, part of pretty great statewide performance from Democrats across a bunch of different elected offices. We elect our Supreme Court here. We had talked previously about Griffin going to the mat in the courts after the fact to try and throw out large numbers of votes from people that followed all the rules that they were obliged to follow at the time, and still were trying to have the Republicans were still trying to throw out those votes. That process is now over. Griffin has resigned. He had gotten a ruling from the North Carolina Supreme Court, which effectively threw out some votes cast in a specific manner in 5 counties, but did not apply those rules to other counties. These are primarily overseas voters and military voters, not exclusively, but basically. It wasn't clear that was going to be enough for him to win anyways. There were some good analyses suggesting that that wasn't going to be enough in terms of the margins in those counties to tilt the overall statewide vote. But the good news is, both from a North Carolina perspective and from a national perspective, I think, because there's a read through here, he withdrew after this decision got a pretty good ruling in federal court. And the read through to national is that the Supreme Court sent a back channel to him saying, buddy, this isn't going to fly. On a constitutional basis, it obviously wouldn't fly because it's a clear violation of the Equal Protection Clause. But that wouldn't have stopped our Supreme Court from just making up laws that go along if they had really wanted to. And it looks like they didn't want to.
Yeah, I think there's a more optimistic way to read this and a less optimistic way to read this. The more optimistic way to read this is that there are limits in what the Republican courts are willing to do to push Republican elections, even in lower courts. I think that's plausible. This would have been pretty egregious. The somewhat less optimistic reading is that this is too small ball for SCOTUS to want to expend capital on. That this seat matters for sure, but it's not make or break even in the context of North Carolina. That's going to be decided in 2028 at soonest is when Dems can flip that court, and they can still flip it. They would have still been able to flip it even if this seat had gone the other way.
I don't know if this is upside or downside or neither of those things. Wasn't he also running out of money, though? Wasn't his fundraising really running dry, and appeals are very expensive to continue pursuing? Thought I remembered that like his last fundraising haul was like a total of like $1,600 or something.
Yeah, I mean, it was bad. He was running out of money, but that kind of goes to the same likelihood of success question. Because if the money people associated with the Republican Party had thought that there was sufficient chance that this was going to net them a North Carolina Supreme Court seat, there would have been some money there to continue the appeal.
Yeah, they would have found the money if he had a reasonable chance of success.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways he was drawing dead as soon as we hit the more limited North Carolina Supreme Court ruling, and it became clear that the number of votes extant was a fairly narrow path to begin with, and also was correctable by Dems, by these overseas voters curing their vote. So I think that even if he had won on the legal merits, on the legal quote unquote merits, he probably still would have lost the election. So there may be a little of that too, that this wasn't a sure thing, even if the courts had gone and blown a lot of credibility fixing this one.
So what are the ramifications or the consequences of this, of him losing and of her going forward?
Makes it easier for Democrats to control the state Supreme Court, which would potentially break the Republican gerrymander of not just the North Carolina General Assembly and Senate, but also the congressional districts in North Carolina. So in North Carolina, Democrats run very well statewide, especially for governor. But there is a frankly obscene gerrymander both in the state house and in the congressional districts that if you get a Democrat majority on the state Supreme Court, you start to look even just a fair map means 4 House seats for Dems probably in the House of Congress and House of Representatives, and something like a 50-50 legislature, which is just a complete game change from now, which is a supermajority for Republicans in both the congressional delegation and the state house.
Is it more egregious than what we had in Wisconsin?
Similar.
Okay. The
Wisconsin was really the model for North Carolina in terms of something where you had a temporary advantage in the state that they were trying to cement as a permanent, unassailable advantage.
They were trying to turn it into Hungary.
Yeah, basically. I mean, the mechanics were a little bit different because in Wisconsin they had the governor's mansion for a while, whereas in North Carolina this is just legislatures. This is legislative force majeure, basically. What this does do is this does avoid a potential whammy scenario where if in addition to losing this race, Dems had also lost the 2026 seat on the North Carolina court, there was a scenario where even with 3 seats up in 2028, we still wouldn't have been able to flip it.
That is not to be confused with a wham scenario, which is when you wake me up before you go.
So it's still way too early for us to be making any kind of confident predictions about what's going to happen in 2026. But we're starting to see some tea leaves about what politicians are doing to prepare.
I'm so upset with Hell Machine right now for that joke.
We're starting to see some Republican candidates who might, under different circumstances, have stood for election in 2026 start to withdraw. And the big names there are 3 state level Republicans who would have had a pretty decent shot at one thing or another, who have in recent weeks decided not to stand for election in 2026. We've got Kim Reynolds, who's the sitting Republican governor in Iowa, who is not running for re-election. She might have been in trouble anyway. She was the least popular governor in America as of late April.
And I think Iowa is one that I'm sort of keeping an eye on as we head into 26, just because I want to see what does this look like when Dorito Mussolini is not on the ballot. You know, could they knock out Ernst? Could they take back the governor's mansion? Could we sort of pull Iowa back to its maybe not? We're probably never going to get the Obama era back in Iowa, but maybe somewhere a little more in the realm of sanity.
We actually got a bit of a read through on that in the the Omaha, Nebraska mayor's election this week. The Democrat John Ewing Jr. knocked off the incumbent Republican. What was her name? Jean Stothert was her name. And it wasn't a complete blowout, but it was pretty decisive. And that part of the country, I mean, there is a read through from Omaha, Nebraska to what's going to happen in Iowa, especially without Dawn juicing the rural red turnout that was so strong in 2024 as it was in 2020.
That one in particular was kind of heartening because I was reading that the incumbent kind of went all in on anti-trans messaging and advertising and promotion, particularly late in the race, and she still got, decisively defeated on it. And that's going in the direction we want things to go in.
And Ewing also leaned into that and did his own messaging that was explicitly like this lady is a freak. Why are we doing this? And she's
worried about potties. He's worried about potholes.
Ding, ding, ding.
It's a good one. We're going to be seeing that one again. She was, I think, a 3-term incumbent at this point, running for her 4th term.
That's correct.
So, I mean, turfing her out is significant. That this was this was a relatively rare Republican bright spot at the blue city mayor level, because Omaha as a city is blue, but they managed to hold on with a Republican in office for I think these were 4-year terms, so for 12 years now.
Speaking of incumbents, there are a couple different ones to talk about elsewhere in the country. Brian Kemp in Georgia, technically not an incumbent because he's the governor, but he is not going to run for Senate in Georgia, which is a big deal because he would have probably walked through the Republican primary there, and is quite popular as a governor. He's I think 2 or 3-term governor in Georgia. 2-term governor in Georgia, and him pulling out is a pretty big signal that he and again, this is somebody who is very, very good at Georgia politics, is not liking his chances against is it Warnock or Ossoff that's up?
It's Ossoff, and he was the only one giving Ossoff a lot of kind of heartache when it came to kind of potential lineups and hypothetical matchups. He was the one who looked like he actually maybe could knock Ossoff out. Once you get rid of Jack Kent or
Brian Kemp.
Once you get rid of Brian Kemp, then you move on to the lesser tier candidates from Georgia.
Yeah, it actually sounds like Marjorie Taylor Greene has decided to give it a miss too, which is unfortunate because I would have really enjoyed watching her get her butt handed to her statewide. But Kemp was far and away the best possible Republican recruit for that Georgia seat, which is our most vulnerable Democratic Senate seat up in 2026. So if he's shying away, that's a good sign that Ossoff is very likely to hold the seat. Kemp is kind of an interesting guy politically because he's very publicly crossed Donald Trump in the past. Back in 2020, he and the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, were both rock-ribbed Republicans who were nonetheless not willing to buy into the whole, find me 13,000 votes, so I win the state thing from Trump. And it's pretty clear that there's no love lost between Kemp and Trump. There's a lot of speculation that Kemp has his eye on 2028 and on a presidential run as somebody who has created some separation between himself and Donald Trump if things continue to go poorly in terms of the Trump legacy. That might be attractive to Republican primary voters and might represent, whether it's an actual pivot back to sanity or a kind of a fig leaf pivot, would still be a move.
Good luck.
Yeah, but I mean, if he runs for Senate, there's Trump hates him, and Trump very well could sandbag him. So I would imagine that Brian Kemp is just going to kind of keep his head down until 2028 rolls around, and then he can just pretend that Trump didn't happen because he's betting that Trump is going to be comically unpopular by that point, probably rightly.
I'm a little sad, though, that Green is not going to run just because in every single polling matchup, Green gets absolutely nuked from orbit by Ossoff. And Ossoff actually has to compete against anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, this is the primary electorate that brought us Herschel Walker. So, I'm confident that Georgia is going to be able to find somebody crazy to run in 2026, even if MTG wants to sit it out.
Also notable up in New Hampshire, Sununu, the governor who has served 4 terms up there, just absolute institution in New Hampshire politics, is not going for the Senate seat. So again, this is a high quality candidate that has a lot going for him, saying, I don't want that smoke, which is not a good sign if you're trying to hold or expand your margins in the Senate from the Republican side of the aisle.
Yeah, these are seats that you would expect in a Republican environment would be competitive plus for Republicans. Sununu would probably be a slight favorite in an open seat race against Chris Pappas is the guy who's likely to be the nominee on the Democratic side. But in a Democratic environment, which I think everybody's kind of pricing in at this point, you're just going to get beat, look bad, and go home.
Yeah, if we were looking at if Kamala had won in November, I think there's a very high likelihood that we're losing both Ossoff and that New Hampshire seat, and with no real shot whatsoever in an Iowa or a Texas, maybe a North Carolina with Cooper running or Cupper, sorry. Like spell your name right, man. What are we doing here?
As it stands, one of the only kind of rumored candidates so far on the Republican side is human barn jacket Scott Brown. But I don't think that Chris Pappas will make the same mistakes that Martha Coakley made. Because yes, it's the same dude.
How is he?
He's just hopping that border.
How? Yeah.
Well, he's got a truck. That's his thing.
Yes, he's the only guy in Boston with a truck.
As a guy whose personality is centered on having a truck, I reject all of this commentary from my fellow podcasters and, in fact, resent it a little bit.
Wait, but do you have a barn jacket?
I don't know what a barn jacket is.
It's a versatile piece of outerwear, George.
Yeah. It's a jacket. It's like the equivalent of the sweater vest in Virginia. You throw a sweater vest on any politician who's a Republican in Virginia, and the whole DC press swoons. You throw a barn jacket on any Republican in New England, and the DC press will also swoon.
Having Googled, this is probably something I will never own, so we're safe.
Does it go with the short shorts, huh?
Listen, these thighs need to breathe. I don't need all of this collar different from the jacket color thing. No.
So so the important thing about New Hampshire is we don't really know exactly what that race is going to look like yet, and we kind of have to wait on the Bears of New Hampshire to weigh in. And this is a politics joke. If you have never read about the bears that invaded a libertarian town in New Hampshire, it's a delightful and absolutely insane story, and we'll link it in the show notes.
To go down a different rabbit hole where there are fewer bears, we've got some good polling out of Texas, even though it's still way premature. And every time I bring up Texas Senate, everybody yells at me because we've been burned so many times on Texas in the past. We have calluses and scars from hoping that good things are going to happen in a Texas election.
And Propter is not lying about that. I have been among the people yelling at him about Texas for the last couple years.
I will actually say, I think you can make a qualitative argument grounded in numbers that this time will be different in Texas, not just because of the thermostatic swing against the sitting president, which will obviously be a factor. I think the polling had Texas a lot closer than it actually turned out to be in this last election, and Latinos were a huge part of that. If we continue to see a maximal or near maximal enforcement of the darkest impulses of Stephen Miller, I do not think you will see anything like those margins for Republicans in Texas. And when you combine that with thermostatic public opinion, it is a winnable seat for Democrats. Now, both of those are contingent. I'm not saying, whatever. I just think you can make a steelman case in favor of a Democrat winning a Texas Senate seat this cycle.
So this is a long-time hobby horse for me, but I think that ICE enforcement, particularly border enforcement down in Texas, kind of cuts both ways with the Latino population, because those border counties are having a federal money hose blasted at them as long as they're trying to do border enforcement. There are literal billions with a B of federal money that are going into what are poor communities. And, it's the whole economic game down there. And those are very heavily Latino communities, and it's enough to move the needle a little bit the other direction. But there's a reason I think that those counties swung so much farther than other heavily Latino districts back under the first Trump administration, and it's because of the money. That said, I agree that for the rest of Texas, that plays a little bit better because Texas is a big state, big economy, and even those billions aren't enough to buy off Houston and Dallas.
Yeah. The RGV dynamic, the Rio Grande Valley dynamic is very real, and that's a really good point. I do think that is somewhat contingent on the Latino population continuing to operate under the assumption that, they're not coming for me. They're not coming for people who are law abiding. They're coming for the bad people. And it's going to be harder and harder to cling to that myth as we progress here. Again, this is contingent. I don't know exactly, I think we all need to be very careful about making predictions about what will or won't happen over the next 2 years. But I think if you just sort of extrapolate the trend line forward, stuff like the Quilma Garcia case that we've talked about, that is moving the needle, and it's really impacting perceptions. And if that continues long term, I think it's going to create a different outcome than what we saw in 2024.
So here's a quick question, and I genuinely don't know the answer to this, so it's not like something where I'm trying to get one of you to give me the answer that I want. So let's say that Ken Paxton, who's currently the AG of Texas, and for my money, one of the top 5 most corrupt politicians in the entire country. Let's say that he does knock Cornyn out in a primary. Does Colin Allred have a better chance against Paxton than he does Cornyn?
Yes, unambiguously he does.
Okay, why is that?
Well, I mean, Paxton is unpopular with a lot of Republicans in Texas because, as you say, he's cartoonishly corrupt, and also he's picked a lot of fights with establishment Republicans aren't really the breakdown, but like you see in a lot of states that have been red for a long time, you have kind of a civil war within the state Republican Party, where you have relatively moderate Republicans. And to be clear, these are not people that I personally would vote for. These are still Republicans, but they're the kind of Republicans that in a blue state they might be Democrats, if that makes sense. These are politicians who are in it because they like politics. They're not as ideological as the lunatic fringe, which is definitely the part of the party that Paxton's more associated with.
They're Mitt Romney, basically.
Yeah, I mean, most of them are to Romney's right, particularly in Texas. But these are guys who are maybe more interested in actually doing the blocking and tackling of politics than they are in passing in another bathroom bill, or prosecuting down to the individual level on doctors who are giving advice that could lead to abortions, both of which are things that Paxton's been very involved in.
The other thing I would say is I think we tend to forget the 2018 midterms, where that seat was decided. This would have been Ted Cruz's seat. That seat was decided by, what was it, like 2 points? He nearly got knocked off by Beto O'Rourke. And much as everyone rightly despises Ted Cruz, I kind of think Ken Paxton is going to be a bit less popular than even Ted Cruz.
Yeah, like Paxton's history of just really genuinely unpleasant behavior. Affairs paid for or paid to cover up. I can't remember the exact story. With his own office's money, he's been under indictment or under investigation for approximately 7,000 years. He's just unbelievably unpleasant as a politician, even as compared to Ted Cruz.
Yes, he would be the less likable senator from Texas if it was a Paxton Cruz lineup.
And imagine being less likable than the guy who, he looks like the Penguin and, abandons your state to go to Cancun every time the state's ridiculous electrical grid melts down.
This is like choosing between colon cancer and testicular cancer.
Wait, which horse do you have in that race?
Depends on how early it gets cut.
Yeah.
I do think the 2018 Senate race is also interesting because if you look at the map of Texas, like the county level map of where the 2.6 percentage margin of victory for Cruz came from, the very, very large concentrations of Democratic votes we now see in North Texas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, much less visible, right? Like this looks like the Dem firewall is in the Rio Grande Valley, which, as we've talked about, has started to swing away from Democrats. So the political geography of this is going to look really different, and the coalition that Democrats could win with in Texas. Now, Will, I want to keep stressing that I'm not predicting what's going to happen. I'm just sort of laying out an argument here. The potential political coalition there looks really different and is much, much more reliable as a midterm election turnout.
I'm going to throw it down here. I have been yelling at y'all about Blexus for a couple years now. I'm going to call it. The Democrats are going to win that Senate seat.
Wow.
I will say that back before this last election, about which I got a lot of things wrong, one piece of digging I did into the Texas Senate race was looking into who contributions were coming from for various notable Texas institutions. And one of the things that really jumped out to me is that a lot of the classic Texas Republican businesses, like the Baker Botts of the world, which that's Secretary of State James Baker, who served under, H.W. Bush, the fixer for the Bush dynasty, the Halliburtons of the world, which is primarily an oil services contracting firm that is associated with the Cheneys. These companies were giving money not to Cruz, but to Allred. And that surprised me a lot, that you had this real divergence between who the institutional players used to give money to in Texas and who they were giving money to now. And like I've got friends who've worked for Baker Botts. It's still a conservative firm, but if we're at the point where it's okay to have your name on a max contribution going to the Democratic challenger instead of going to Ted Cruz as an attorney at that firm, then that's a signal of a culture shift. Anyway, it's still too early to have any confidence in these polls, but we do have some early numbers out of Texas, and we now have 3 different private polls. So take them with a grain of salt. You always take a private poll with that. These wouldn't be released if somebody wasn't trying to push some kind of an agenda. But we have 2 Republican private polls and 1 Democratic private poll that have Paxton up over John Cornyn, who's the incumbent senator from Texas, by between 16 and I think it's 21 points in the primary. So we've been talking about Paxton like he's probably going to be the nominee. It's still early, but that's what the numbers say right now, that Paxton is probably going to be the nominee.
Yes, and just to be clear, my bet on the Democrats winning that Texas Senate seat is premised on me betting on the sheer stupidity of the Republican Party in that primary. Like I'm betting that old Ken is going to take Cornyn out.
If we want to win that Senate seat as opposed to do harm reduction with that Senate seat, Paxton's the guy we want to run against. He's going to be a less formidable general election opponent than Cornyn or than any of the also-rans who are kind of poking around the edges of the race. Now, the polling that we've seen for the general election that is polling various Republican candidates against all red, let me just take a quick digression here. I don't think that all red is magical there. I think that all red has name recognition, and therefore he's a better proxy for some of the other potential Democratic hopefuls than they themselves would be, because they don't have name recognition yet. But no matter what the matchup is here, Texas is one of the very, very few routes for us to take the Senate in 2026. So Dems are going to spend a lot of money there. We're probably going to hit triple-digit millions in single-party spending for that race, especially if it's Paxton, because people are going to get their wallets out because screw that guy.
Make sure your phone's charged because you're about to get a lot of Act Blue texts.
So in the general election polling right now, it's interestingly, it's only the Republican pollsters who have released general election heats for all red versus Paxton. But Brad Parscale, who is Trump's pollsters outfit, has all red up 15 points over Paxton in the general. 15 points is
good Lord,
insane. Yeah. I mean, like again, we've all been burned by Texas before, but we've never had a result like that in Texas before, even this early, where you can look at that and say, wow, this isn't just the shape of a win. This is maybe a blowout. Anyway, SLF, which is kind of the centrist Senate PAC for the Republicans, also polled the race, and they have all red beating Paxton by 1, while all red loses to Cornyn by 6. So everybody's showing a significant differential between how Paxton would perform in a GE and how Cornyn would perform in a GE. We're probably not up by 15 against Paxton. That's a little too much to hope for. But I think there's a very real chance that if it is Paxton, we come in as favorites.
How much of this, you commented that we only have polls from 2 Republican pollsters. How much of this is either Parscale or what was it?
SLF. Yeah.
Pushing, trying to push Cornyn into the lead as trying to convince Texas primary voters to stay away from Paxton as opposed to the other way around. Like is there gamesmanship going on there, or do we think this is a clean hit?
Oh, I mean, I think the polls are legit, but I don't think we would have seen them if they didn't show this. That's where the dirty pool usually comes in on private polling, is that you do the poll and you do it as accurately as you can. But if it's not pushing a message you care about, you bury it. You don't release it. So I absolutely think that SLF and maybe it's a little bit harder for me to understand what Parscale's trying to do. But I think that there is some amount of pushing this to try to sell Cornyn as the electability candidate.
Yeah. I mean, also a 15-point lead versus a 1-point lead. That's a lot of variance. I mean, we are so early that this is all sort of hypothetical still, but that's still a pretty big variance. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, Parscale didn't release the Cornyn versus Allred heat, which means that Cornyn was probably losing to Allred too. So it may have been that they just pulled a super blue sample for the GE and wanted to play it up because of the reasons you said, that they wanted to drive home how unelectable Paxton might be. So, we can't take too much hope from that. The one other thing I will say is that we did have Democratic private polling that corroborated that Paxton is currently rinsing Cornyn in the primary. So I think we're on fairly solid ground there. That we've had 3 different polling outfits that are all reasonably good polling outfits who've taken a look at it, and they all think it's plus or minus 20 points lead.
Could also be a function of how much you're pushing leaners too. If you've got the poll with Paxton was 52-37, I would guess that. So that leaves another 11 points of people. I would guess nearly all of those people would wind up with Paxton.
So is what you guys are saying that the time may now be right for the Dems to win the night deep in the heart of Texas?
Jail.
Oh,
no trial.
That's get me out of here.
So back here in DC, the news is really what's not happening on Capitol Hill right now, which is that Republicans are not successfully moving this reconciliation bill as yet. We're kind of in a holding pattern to see what happens, because the claims that they've made of what they're going to do with this bill are very bold, and they require a lot of people in very thin majorities in both houses to swallow it if it's going to get through.
So one of the easiest ways to describe this right now, particularly on the House Republican side, is everybody is pissed at everyone else. You got on the Freedom Caucus side, they want significantly more cuts than Johnson will ever be able to deliver. He will never be able to deliver everything that they're asking for and clear a majority in the House. You've got on the moderate side folks who are starting to get kind of shaky about the Medicaid cuts, not as shaky as I would like them to be, and a handful of Republicans who can actually tank it, who are just volcanically pissed off about SALT.
And SALT, to be clear, is the state and local tax deduction, which already took a big hit with the standard deduction going way up under the first Trump administration's tax plan. Fewer people itemize taxes when the standard deduction is higher, so it matters less if you have these other deductions going on.
That SALT deduction geographically works out to basically New York, New Jersey Republicans saying, we absolutely have to deliver on this. Like, this is our reason to exist, is to get this thing through for our constituents, because those states have much more capacity and therefore much higher taxes. Yeah, so that's that crew, and then the Freedom Caucus crew are scattered out. Chip Roy is sort of the standard bearer. He's Texas, if I remember correctly, and then South and Midwest, I think, is probably the best way to think of that. And then there is a third faction too, which is Republicans that are interested in not completely gutting the IRA, for instance. A fourth faction would be Republicans who want to do a bunch of cuts, but don't want a $600 billion cut to Medicaid, a $290 billion cut to SNAP, which is like a 30% cut to food assistance, as well as just a ton of different programs that are going to really drive up the cost of everything from electricity to natural gas, while providing tax cuts to rich people. I mean, there is a real Republican caucus who is looking at that and going like, that's not going to work for me. So yeah, good luck, I guess, Mike Johnson. They seem to be holding things together for now, but the rubber isn't really hitting the road yet.
Yeah, and SNAP is particularly difficult because for a long time, food assistance has been this sort of, it's not exactly a corrupt bargain, but it definitely is one hand washing the other, where Democrats get food assistance for poor people in urban areas, and Republicans get subsidies for farmers because that's how the food assistance works, is we push a whole bunch of money towards farmers to buy the food.
I just want to say anything that gets tri-state Republicans washed on having to pay more taxes, I'm in favor of. Like these greasy Staten Island ass pricks in Jersey and elsewhere, all of them. Take them down. Filibuster that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I kind of thought that we should have nuked salt back when we had the trifecta, just from a political standpoint, not from an economic standpoint. It's good that we're capping it at some point, but we could have taken it up to, a 30K exemption to a 50K exemption and still rinsed the billionaires while providing enough of a political sop to those districts that maybe we're still looking at a Democratic House right now.
Anything that makes a Chris Christie voter cry, I am in favor of.
I mean, the thing about these salt caps is that these are Trump salt caps. These were passed during reconciliation, during the first Trump administration. That was his big middle finger to the blue states, that, you guys can no longer get this subsidy. You're going to have to actually squeeze your rich people instead of allowing them to deduct their taxes against federal taxes. So I thought we should have, as a matter of politics, not as a matter of economics, not as a matter of fairness, just as a matter of politics, I thought we should have torn that down, salted the earth, if you will.
There it is.
Jail.
Yeah.
Jail. No trial.
Propter and Go Like Hell Machine, you guys, you're at your quota for dad jokes. We're done with those from you two. I'm going to accept one from Lowtax. I might drop something in myself, but we can't each do multiple jokes that bad on one podcast. On the salt thing, I will say there is a compelling case to be made both ways on the economics of state and local tax deduction caps. Basically, giving blue states the ability to do actual fiscal transfers to their lower income residents and build state capacity is a genuinely useful thing, both from a politics perspective and from an economics perspective. On the flip side, the ultimate redistributor of income in this country is the federal government, and trying to do fiscal policy from the state level as opposed to the federal level is a recipe for disaster at some point, as we found out in the Eurozone. I did just get back from Greece after all.
Are you so George, are you salty about the salt joke? Is that what I'm getting from this?
Okay, that's your one.
Capital punishment all around, so to speak. Anyway, I think we can kind of leave salt where it is there. It looks to me like the blue state Republicans have the votes to make something happen there. So they're going to get at least some movement their direction. And they're just going to have to figure out how to sell whatever budget busting it does to the rest of the caucus.
The other thing to remember about this reconciliation process is that the real tricky stuff in a reconciliation bill is going to happen in the Senate. The Senate is where all of the bird rule tests and parliamentary procedure and just goofy stuff about this reconciliation process really binds. So it's important to remember anything you see out of the House is bargaining or negotiation as opposed to some sort of final thing that has to be in the bill. Anything that goes through the House is then going to get redone in the Senate and then go back to the House for one more vote. And how the House sets up what they send to the Senate is ultimately not very important. The dynamics in the House and how they approach whatever the Senate does do matter, but the Senate can basically dictate to the House on this stuff. And it's not clear they will. I don't have a good bead on how the two caucuses relate to each other in that sense. But I just, when you're seeing all this stuff come out of the House committees that we saw this week, I was talking about almost $700 billion worth of Medicaid cuts, for instance. Just keep that in mind, that that's a negotiating position, not what will be in the final bill.
Yeah, and I think that for people who are kind of out there and listening to us, I think you're probably similarly politically aligned, and want to see Dems try to put up a fight. Dems in the House Ways and Means Committee just last night went for 25 hours on offering amendments, and got every single one rejected. They can't control that, but they fought every single line of the bill and every single line of the markup from their counterparts in Ways and Means. So there's not a lot they can do to stop all of this, but they are trying to do what they can.
Yeah, I honestly don't think that there's a whole lot of cause for complaint about how the House Democrats in particular have conducted themselves, at least after Lake and Riley this term.
Oh, I think I had said this like a few episodes back, that I thought we were going to be in a place where the Dems were sort of going to be fumbling around in the post-election hashtag analysis era that you always get when you lose an election, and you have to look inward and what lessons do we learn and all of this nonsense. But I get the feeling that the Dems are, in fact, starting to find their footing. And I think that was perfectly foreseeable.
So one other interesting thing that happened this last week was that Ras Baraka, who is the mayor of Newark, went and got himself arrested at an ICE facility. And my initial thought when I saw this was that this was something where Ras Baraka is running for governor of New Jersey. It's a kind of a tight race on the Democratic side in the primary. I thought this was something where he went out there with the intention of getting himself arrested. And after looking at the video, it was not that. This was something where he was out there with three Democratic House members doing oversight on this ICE facility, which apparently the congressmen at least have the legal right to do, because we snuck that one in back when we had the trifecta. And they got bum rushed by like 20 ICE agents. It was kind of a ridiculous video.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to Aaron Reichlin Melnick on Blue Sky, who surfaced this back in 2020. They put this rider in that mandated ICE and also any facility operated for ICE, so this includes private prisons, be willing to submit to inspection by congressional oversight on 24 hours notice. So a congressperson or a senator can show up at any ICE facility in the country or any facility operated on contract for ICE and walk through. You need 24 hours notice from your staff. That's it. They cannot deny them access. So when you see a member of Congress doing this, I mean, this is something that was snuck inside a spending bill back in 2020 during Trump's first term. And this was, we don't want to give Democrats too much credit, but this was really smart. Whoever came up with this idea to sneak this in really did good work, because it's just such a free hit on and also a genuinely valuable way to keep track of what's going on inside the carceral state that does so much damage to people.
Yeah, and I think we all kind of have these terror scenarios running through our mind about what's happening inside of these ICE facilities at this point, and it's been very nice to have Congress people going there and giving us some on the ground reporting from places where it's clear the agency would prefer that nobody be. The conditions in these holding facilities are bad. They're not equally bad everywhere. Some of these facilities are much worse than others. But we've had a number of deaths already this year in ICE holding facilities, including of relatively young and previously relatively healthy people. These are bad news. And I think that we are going to hear much more over the months and years to come coming out of these facilities that is going to be pretty dire.
Who is Ras Baraka?
Well, so I took a lot of poetry classes in college. And I had not realized that Ras Baraka was Amiri Baraka's kid. Amiri Baraka, born Leroy Jones, was I think it's fair to call him a black nationalist poet who is sort of tangentially associated with the later beat movement. So he wasn't really part of the initial Kerouac and Ginsberg wave, but kind of with the second set of beats. I wouldn't say that Amiri Baraka is he was a very good poet, but he's got Wikipedia sections entitled "Anti-White Racism, Misogyny, Rape Advocacy, Homophobia, Anti-Semitism, and the 9/11 Attacks." So he was kind of a loon. I don't think Ras Baraka is a loon. He seems like a pretty good guy.
So what you're saying is he'll be the Republican nominee for governor next year.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where Amiri Baraka's politics were late in life, to be honest. He's probably written some things about Donald Trump at some point. But anyway, Ras Baraka, I think, is probably now the outright favorite for New Jersey governor on the Democratic side. It's a tight race. Baraka and Fulop were the two kind of more anti-establishment candidates. Mickey Sherrill, who is the establishment wing candidate, has not really caught fire. It's New Jersey politics. If you stare too long into that particular void, you go insane. But this is a big name recognition bump, doing something that a lot of Democrats in New Jersey agree with in what was already going to be a tight race.
I'm always amazed that national Republicans and I'm going to include ICE in national Republicans because they are very clearly partisan aligned, have never heard of Barbara Streisand ever. And they have never heard of the Streisand effect ever.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the dynamics at work here is that Alina Habba, who you may remember as Trump's personal attorney,
she's the gamer laptop lady, right?
Oh yeah, didn't she have a Razer laptop or something?
Yeah, she had a Razer laptop in court.
Yeah. So before she started working for Trump, she was a parking garage attorney. That's a term of art in this case that essentially her entire career to date had been doing litigation surrounding parking lots and parking garages.
I was gonna say like literally she worked as how many accidents and scrapes can you have in a parking garage where you need a attorney on staff? Like, what are we doing?
I mean, plenty, I guess. You got to have somebody show up. Anyway, she's the
was
one.
This the parking garage from Ferris Bueller's Day Off?
She's the attorney who lost Trump a whole lot of money on the rape civil litigation in New York, where she did not perform particularly well. But anyway, she is now the acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey, and it's pretty clear that she was directing some of the skull cracking, and this might be kind of an audition tape for her.
They're calling her the most qualified New Jersey attorney in history, folks. I can tell you.
So in New Jersey, you've got Alina Habba, who may be auditioning for some kind of subsequent appointment by doing things that'll get her on TV and get her back in, Trump's cone of vision. We just kind of went through the same thing down in DC with Ed Martin, who we're going to list as another victory, at least provisionally, for the good guys.
And another North Carolina connection. We'll get to that.
And by the way, Alina Habba leaving Trump's cone of vision for Ed Martin entering Trump's cone of vision shows you just how much President Pawpaw is falling apart here, I think.
All right. And then now we'll go to the next section.
Yeah, so let's whip back over to the executive branch writ large. One of the good things that happened recently, since we last taped, was that Ed Martin is out as the nominee for the DC U.S. Attorney. Ed Martin, who I think we talked about a little bit on the show before, has been sending nasty grams to anybody he can think of, particularly educational institutions, hospitals, entertainers. He's been using one of the lesser known powers of the DC acting U.S. Attorney's office, which is just to send nasty letters with no legal force behind them and get them written up in the paper.
I want to make sure that we give him his due because he was the St. Louis Riverfront Times 2010 Ass Clown of the Week winner. But what he got was a consolation prize. So essentially, Tom Tillis, who has been an oath breaker in the past when it has come to Senate confirmations, even Tom Tillis couldn't actually vote for him, and that more or less sank him the nomination. So now he has been placed at the head of a committee that is basically the name and shame committee, which is one of the more ridiculously shameless things that this administration has done thus far.
The Tom Tillis intervention here is interesting for two reasons, in my opinion. First thing is, I think it loops back to what we were talking about with incumbents and Senate races in 2026. Tom Tillis is going to get a very, very strong challenge from Roy Cooper, who was a two-term governor, very popular. Every indication I've seen is that he's running for that Senate seat. I very heavily expect him to win that seat. And Tillis actually saying no to Trump on something is, I think, decent evidence of that reality sinking in for him. If you go back to the Hegseth nomination, the Secretary of Defense Hegseth nomination, Pete Hegseth, whatever this gin enthusiast name is, Tillis was one of the senators who could have sunk the nomination and chose not to. And there was reporting, we had talked about this in our previous episode, there was reporting that he was actually afraid physically for himself if he had voted no. I think there was a very clear fog of war in DC right after the Trump administration kicked off that took Trump to be totally invulnerable and able to do whatever he wanted, and resisting him was either political suicide or put you at real physical risk. And I think that has worn off at this point. I think when you look at the tariff conversation with financial markets, and we haven't really talked about this yet, but Trump walked back the China tariffs essentially. He did this because the financial markets forced him to. I mean, it's really that simple. And I think that, combined with other evidence that we're getting feedbacks from the public against the Trump administration, has taken that sort of shine of invulnerability off of these guys. And it's going to be interesting to see how long it takes them to figure that out. But I think Tillis is one piece of evidence. Tillis basically putting the kibosh on Ed Martin is one piece of evidence that the shine is off and they can't just dictate anymore.
I just love that we have a Department of Justice that is naming and shaming now. They're not actually doing anything, but they're gonna let you know about it because you said something that hurt their fifis on the internet. I think the Brits actually tried to legislate that to save J.K. Rowling from pylons a couple of years back.
Well, the funny thing is that so we're not gonna have Ed Martin, which is great. Who we might have instead is Janine Pirro, which, if you have never watched Fox News, we're adding another Fox News barely functional alcoholic to Trump's cabinet.
I just want to say on just to circle back one last time on Ed Martin, the Democrats need to appoint. They need to keep that name and shame commission, but they need to appoint Will Stansel to head it when they take back the White House in 2029, because I want to see that.
Anyway, the good news on Janine Pirro is that she's 70 something and she falls asleep a lot. So I'm optimistic that that the work rate coming out of the DC U.S. Attorney's Office is going to go down a little bit during her tenure as interim U.S. Attorney here.
Presumably brought to you by Breakfast Gin.
I think she's a Franzia girl.
No, breakfast wine, which is not nearly as offensive as breakfast gin, but still deadly if you do it all breakfast long. So when's the last time that she has actually really worked as like a practicing attorney? Does anybody know?
Oh man, 90s, I think.
The Polk administration.
She had a brief stint. She had a brief stint on the bench. And she had a brief stint as an elected prosecutor, but those were both well into the 90s. So
a recurring theme on this podcast is they're running out of lawyers, and boy, are they ever running out of lawyers.
Yeah, I don't think she counts as a lawyer anymore. I'm not even sure she really plays one on TV. I think her shtick is mostly being angry, condescending, and drunk, which I sympathize with. But
she was on television in the 90s, so that's all Trump needs, right? Because his brain stopped working in 1994. So,
speaking of Trump's age, we've got here in DC, we have a birthday parade coming up for Trump that I'm not super excited about. On June 14th, it is technically I believe the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army.
Correct.
As they count it, but it also happens to be Trump's birthday, and that's why we're having a parade, and everyone knows that. Details TBD. They've released the parade route. It goes over a bridge, which I'm a little concerned about.
So no M1 Abrams then, I'm assuming, for the sake of both the tank drivers and the bridge.
He's going to do what that plane that skidded on the ice into the bridge couldn't do like 30 years ago.
I'm assuming that they have civil engineers on staff somewhere who are looking at this and saying it's okay to put whatever you're planning on putting over the Potomac.
Why would you assume that from the Trump administration?
I don't know where you're getting that from.
I'm assuming that the Army has civil engineers. They
actually have an entire corps of them, believe it or not.
Yeah. But we just fixed up that bridge, right? Like, it would really suck if they took out the bridge. Also, people would probably die, and that would be bad too. But we've got a parade route. They're going to rip hell out of the roads around here. It's going to be awful. But that's coming up, and that is definitely factoring in to the ongoing negotiations about DC's budget, where it's clear that certain certain House Republicans are kind of relishing having the whip hand over DC right now. We're still looking at, I think it's a $400 million budget shortfall because they're telling us we can't spend our own money as a result of the continuing resolution, which is going to necessitate furloughing a whole bunch of DC employees, teachers, cops, firefighters, people that it's fine if they just take a couple of weeks off. It's not going to be a big deal.
But hey, at least you'll find some jobs for them with that new bridge you're going to need.
So the wild thing about this is that they're trying to do it in such a short period of time. We are recording this on May 14th. They are talking about hosting this on June 14th. We're 1 month out. So a couple of things to think about here. It usually takes about 4 months to build the inauguration platform for the presidential inauguration. And they keep talking like they have a bigger game this time. The National Park Service has said that the permit is considered approved. This is not the same thing as a permit actually having been approved by the city. And it's apparently going to cost more than $45 million. And I have to assume some 7-digit portion of that is going to go straight into Kid Rock's pocket and get spent on Busch Light.
I mean, who's gonna approve it? There's one of the 3 people left at the National Park Service that Elon hasn't fired?
Yeah, we got Ranger Rick out here doing approvals. Smokey the Bear doing approvals.
One thing I do think that you can tell that the administration has not considered at all. So like the entire sort of entirety of people who would be in the parade from a military standpoint is going to be far less than like 10,000 people, right? Marches in January in DC brought out more than 100,000 people. In January in Washington, D.C., this will be June in Washington, D.C., and Trump is far less popular now. And the potential optics of, like, I don't know, a tank falling through the street and then being surrounded by 200,000 DC residents is something that, we would see every single day for the entire rest of this administration. You do have to wonder if anybody is telling them to watch out for some comedic pitfalls.
Yeah, we'll know more about the parade as we get a little bit closer to it and as they make it up.
These are, like, Trump's fans are all car dealers in Ohio. They're not ready for this. It's June in DC, right? Like, Propter's from DC, George is in Charlotte, and I'm in Florida. These boys ain't built for this.
I've actually lived in DC in June, and I don't recommend it.
As have I. It is awful.
It beats August, I'll say that. Meanwhile, over on the Hill, we've had RFK giving testimony today about HHS cuts, and he's been in the news recently for going swimming in Rock Creek, as long as we're talking about local DC institutions, on Mother's Day. I'm going to quote a friend of mine about Rock Creek, which is under an advisory from that National Park Service and its 3 remaining employees not to swim in it because it's full of fecal bacteria. That my friend commented that he thinks it's gross when people let their dogs swim in Rock Creek. So that's the level of contamination we're talking about.
There is no reason to be in Rock Creek, in or around Rock Creek, unless you are a spy or a congressman trying to dispose of his mistress.
RFK also moved today to introduce new restrictions on mifepristone, which is a key step in medication abortion. It's a 2-step process, and mifepristone is one of the steps. And yeah, I mean, most predictable thing imaginable that a Trump flunky at DHS would move to significantly restrict access to abortion for the entire country. Exactly what everyone was voting for last fall, and looks like we're going to get that. So it's also worth noting that pill-based abortions are still accessible via packages delivered from overseas. Their Aid Access is the big group that does this. There are a number of others. Just because the FDA moves to change the access to abortion pills in the US doesn't mean that they won't be available at all to anybody, but it will raise the bar. And for abortion clinics, it'll change things, because providing an abortion through a pill versus providing it through a procedure are 2 very different things, both in terms of cost and in terms of the volume of procedures you're able to do, and so on and so forth. So that's a huge deal. I haven't seen a lot of news about that, but if mifepristone is pulled by the FDA, there would be court challenges. It's going to be a contingent process. So let's not get over our skis here, but that would be a big deal. And again, is an entirely predictable result of what happened last fall.
The one add-on comment I have on that is that my understanding is that MIF keeps pretty well on the shelf. So if you're in a red state and you're worried about it, you might want to do a little of your own research and see whether or not getting a little stocked up is a thing you could do right now.
I mean, not just red state, I will say, like, a number of blue states have done stockpiles, and if you're in California, you will probably be able to get access to an abortion pill. But if you are in a state, which is most of them, that haven't developed stockpiles or that are rationing, then yeah. And also, who knows how long those supplies will hold out for. So this is a nationwide thing. This is going to mean people in blue states who thought this was not a problem they had to worry about really do have something to worry about. And yeah, it remains to be seen how this whole process plays out, but banning mifepristone nationally or removing approval for it nationally would be a huge hit to abortion access in a country that is already having a lot of trouble getting access to the abortion care it needs.
I will say also, this is less serious than that, but our worm-brained, shit-swimming, roadkill enthusiast Health and Human Services Secretary could not, when asked by Senator Alsobrooks today, name a department within the National Institutes of Health that was named after his own aunt.
I do think that him swimming in Rock Creek may explain RFK as we understand him. Like, that may be where the worm came from, and that may be what's completely destroyed his brain. Like, he's probably been doing it since he was a kid, and his dad was AG and stuff.
Not destroyed enough, in my opinion.
All right. On that note, a boiled tomato swimming in a flowing creek full of sewage. We are going to leave you for the week. For normal men, I'm George.
I'm Propter.
I'm Lowtax.
And I'm GOLIKEHELLMACHINE.
And thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. If you could please rate and review us in your podcast app of choice, we sure would appreciate it. Stay normal, y'all.